All right, so as we talk about printing, you have your block, your image is transferred, your plate is prepped, it is markered out. You'll need to use your lino cutting tool. So this is a lino cutting tool. Usually it has more parts in the bottom for different gouges. Mines have been overused and are a little old, but I'll still show you the same thing. I'll just use my other tools that have the same blades. I personally like them being individual, but I also like the affordability and efficiency of these. So for these ones, you have your base, which has oftentimes more parts in it. And then you have this, which is the chuck, which you'll twist to loosen. And then you can pull the blade out and switch it with another blade. So as you see, this one's a little rusty and it's a little old, but it is a V-gouge. All right, so it looks like a V. And we'll talk about those. Again, I am going to use my other tools as an example, but they're the same tips, just in individual form. So all right, one of the first tools we're going to talk about is the V-gouge. So this is a V-gouge, right? It's shaped like the letter V. And you'll usually have an assortment of these. Sometimes you just get one, but over time you'll need more. This is the V-gouge. And as we think about the mark that the V-gouge makes, I'm going to use this here. Because it's pointy, it'll start off at a taper, but oftentimes it'll get a little bigger in the middle. So V-gouge, if I draw that part out a little bit better than that, it's going to start out a taper, then get wider, and then end in a taper. And we're talking on like a very exaggerated or close-up scale. That's what the marking it's going to make. Little bit like that. Sometimes this part is thinner depending on how far down you go with the V-gouge. So I'll just use this plate now as an example. If I stay right at the top, pushing, and then I'll finish it off. So I slid a little bit, but there it is, right? Thin, thicker, thin. That's the mark of a V-gouge. Again, depending on which size V-gouges you got, they might go thinner, thicker, but that's its general goal. Here's my thinner V-gouge here. So for this one, I went much deeper, just to show you that just because it's thinner doesn't mean it can't go wide. And then also, I'll go incredibly thin. And so there it is, thinner. Now, this is why we want those Sharpie markers to enhance our drawing, because imagine trying to go thinner than that. Your V-gouge, which is usually one of your thinnest tools, has a little bit trouble, but it still can do it. You can see in my earlier example that it was able to do it. Next, we have the U-gouge, and I have an assortment of those. So this is a very wide U-gouge that I have. That's for clearing a lot of material. Here is a smaller U-gouge. Then this is my widest U-gouge. Again, wider U-gouges are usually for clearing large material. The U-gouge usually makes a rounded mark, and oftentimes a little bit thicker in the middle. That's not to say that it can't do the same thing that the V-gouge does. As far as tapering goes, it's a lot easier with a V-gouge than it is with a U. So I can flick it off, right? So I just pulled it and then I broke it, and that way I got a flat edge, but generally we can see that, right? It starts with a U. It can end sharply, but normally you can get it to end a little bit harder or rounder than what I just did. Those, again, I have a bunch of tools, so those are my U-gouges. And then sometimes you'll get a chisel tool and a knife tool. So the first thing that I must mention is that for all of these tools, the V-gouges, or for all of the V-gouges, the chisel, the U-gouges, with all of those tools, you're pushing away from yourself. The knife tool is the only tool that you will pull towards yourself, or can pull towards yourself. And the knife tool works like this. Say I wanted to have this incredibly thin line carved out. What I would do is use the knife tool, going at a slight angle, and pulling towards myself. So basically going in at this angle, I'll draw that. If this is the plate, my knife tool goes at that angle. And then there's a likelihood that if I push this deep enough, not that you need to go incredibly deep, if your nail can catch on it, you've went deep enough. You just got to make sure that your inking is proper. But once I do this, I can come from the other side with the knife tool, and essentially I'm creating my own V-gouge that works however I want it to. So I did that first line. I can see it there. And then next, taking that knife tool and going the opposite direction against the edge. And just flick that out. And so I got this incredibly thin piece to come out. And that's probably one of the ways I can get the thinnest lines that I want. The chisel tool won't really be useful on linoleum. I would prefer a wider U-gouge than the chisel tool, but it works incredibly well in combination with the knife tool. And the knife tool, I would actually recommend you start your entire drawing off, or your entire carving session off, using the knife tool. So let's say I'm gonna just take this one as an example. I know I'm carving out all of this part. I'm gonna use the knife tool to go right against the edge of the image. And what this does is create this trough, or this valley, or this barrier that if I want, so I have that down, and there's a thin line carved in there. It won't print, right? It's just pushed down. But using my other tools, I'll use something a little bit smaller than that. Using my other tools, I can come against that mark that I just made. And then, boom, right? Flick that off and it stops right where that line that I carved is. Because it's already been cut, right? You just need to get your other tool to meet that line. And that's it, right? And it just breaks off right against that line. So normally if I'm doing any of my carving, I'll outline everything and then with the knife tool, and then use any of my other gouges to carve out the material. That's your tools. Lastly, I would say that if you don't have any of these tools, you can use the X-Acto knife the same way as you use the knife tool, right? Just carving out in delicate motions, and it'll still do the same thing. It'll just take you a lot longer. But using the X-Acto knife or box cutter or utility knife to do the same thing as the knife tool as far as carving out goes. That's it.